morning. It's been a heated one, like we've said. This man is an Irishman. We've got an Irishman in the studio. He's been in Kenya for the last 37 years, lived here, worked with us. He has campaigned for many things, for the country. He is a human rights defender. He's a columnist. He writes for the Standard. He is a priest. He is Father Gabriel Dolan. People who know you know you. Then there are those, of course, who don't know you. So I'm going to give you the opportunity, first of all, to introduce us to this Irishman who's been here for so long.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
My name is Gabriel Dolan. I'm Irish. And as you said, I've lived in Kenya for the last 37 years. I've worked as a priest in Turkana for 15 years. In Kitale, that's North Rift, for 10 years. And now I'm in Mombasa. I also run a small human rights organization called Haki Yetu.
Small indeed, right?
Well we're there, yeah. We have offices in Malindi and Lunga, and we cover 4 counties in the coast. And I have a staff of 10 people.
What's your focus in this human rights? I mean, in what area of human rights do you push?
When I went to Mombasa, first of all, for years I've lived in Bangladesh, an informal settlement. So my first concern and my interest over the years has been land and evictions and settlement. And that is very much the thrust of our work yet. We may not be getting involved in the issues of like the disappearance of these young men in Kwale and the killings, because we've left that to both Muhuri, where I am a board member, and to Haki Africa, who do it with great competence. We also look at issues of peace, the killings of old people. But our primary big concern for us that takes up a lot of our time is land and governance.
When you say land and governance, what do you mean exactly?
I suppose, if you look at the situation in Mombasa, we have 55 to 60% of the people live in informal settlements. And that's a huge percentage of the population. They're the forgotten people. It's the same in Nairobi, it's the same so you have to be concerned about issues of security of tenure, the threat of evictions, the grabbing of public land. As I was in Kitale and elsewhere, that's a concern. You can't look at the issue of land without saying who governs it, how the policy is. So it affects issues of housing as well.
Historically, where did this all? I mean, it would be interesting to get a perspective in terms of where this all started and why we have this serious problem that we do today in Mombasa with issues land. Where did it all stem from?
The issue of land in Mombasa, it's not just a Mombasa issue.
Of course, it's a countrywide issue.
It's a coastal one, and it's a countrywide issue, though there are certain areas in Kenya that haven't been affected to the same extent. So obviously, where there's a greater demand for land, there's a greater need, greater interest in it. And the fact that the land has been grabbed by the political elite for 50 years and by the British before that. So the trend is there. And everywhere there's been no will to address that issue.
But when you say the British, you have left out the Arabs, because the 10-mile strip that the Sultan of Zanzibar supposedly owned and the habitation of the coast as we speak it, I would argue, began with the Arabs. The Portuguese didn't do a good job of actually maintaining what they thought. The British cemented their stay there, so we remember them. But that history has to take the confluence of all these people before we actually say and talk about the land problem.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're very familiar with that as an organisation with Haki Yetu, because at the moment we've been working on this issue of the 10-mile strip, especially with the Mazrui land in Takayunga and that area, because we were working with 2,000 families who have no security of tenure, and that land is still with the Mazrui family. So, in fact, this year, for example, just to look at that 10-mile strip as one example, was the fact that we made a petition to Parliament. The Parliamentary Land Committee came on the ground. They met the people and then they met the Mazrui family. Now, in December, just before Parliament went on recess, the Lands Committee said that this land has to be given back to the community. And it's up to the Ministry of Lands to start doing it.
And what grounds were they using to give the land back to the community?
Well, the final report will give details on that, but they say that the people have been living on this land.
It's occupation that they're looking at.
Yes.
And they're looking at the law regarding occupation. Essentially, they are So are you saying that the land previously belonged to them, or are they using the law that governs squatters? Because if somebody occupies your land and it's unchallenged over a period of time, there is a law in this country that not enable them to occupy all of it, but a portion of that land has to
Goes
be
to
given
them,
to
Has to be
Yes.
given.
as squatters.
Yes.
So I'm asking, is it this, or is it that these are the people who we can trace back and say were the original
These are the
owners of
original
this land
inhabitants.
before the declaration of the 10-mile strip, and so that the land originally belonged to them? Which
But
of these?
No, I would think it's with regards to squatters that they're making that determination, because of the fact that the people have been on the land for as long as they remember, you know. But they don't have any security, they don't have any title,
Yeah.
they don't have any legal responsibility. But the issue is, while that's only one stage in the process, because I'm sure the Mazrui family are not going to give up this land easily. They're also going to resist.
They're going to put up a fight, of course.
They're going to put up a fight,
Right.
and we don't know where that might go. It may go the same way as the Waititu land, because if they do start doing negotiations, and then they're being paid if they get some form of compensation.
Perhaps we handled those two, the Waititu matter
Waitiki.
wrongly. Waitiki, sorry, and we're handling this one. Why did I say Waititu?
It's okay. It's
Waitiki.
everywhere right now. So.
Waitiki. And we're handling this one. You see, the legal process in my mind by which this matter ought to have been settled was perhaps through mediation. Because mediation doesn't just sort of give the sort of ruling that you'd have a high court. There is the drive from the word go to try and find a way of ensuring that everyone benefits. And yet their findings and rulings are as binding as any high court. But a court of law, it's a right and wrong. And these situations don't usually have a clear right and wrong. No, a middle ground has to be found in order to actually give parity to all the parties that are involved. Yes. Because you're talking about Waitiki land. Was it 1,000 acres? Okay.
Yeah, somebody with a legal claim to the land.
Oh, it was his. There was no question about it. But other people had been living in that land for the number of years that should allow them tenure according to our laws.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, if you say these guys were wrong and they were right, you actually haven't dealt with the issues that surround that land. Now, it is, you see, why I'm saying this is important. The issue of squatters and land is not an issue of the coast. It's been highlighted at the coast.
But it's countrywide.
It's
right?
countrywide, yes. And if you set a precedent on that, then you then have a situation where instead of solving the problem, you're creating an explosive situation. Yes.
So how do you actually approach that now that if you look at the coastal strip, this is a different kettle of fish altogether, because you're talking about, well, this it was a government declaration. There was some original arrangement between governments, and then there are people who have owned this land. They have never occupied it. I mean, they've never put this land to any meaningful use. They just have a legal claim to the land. And yet people who've been living here as their ancestral land don't have any legal claim to the land. How do you balance those two? If you just go and declare that, no, this land should revert to the original owners, the inhabitants.
Eric, what is tricky, there are settlement schemes even within the area of the coast, all right? Like in Kikambala and what have you. And many of the people who got land when they created the settlement schemes were people who had been living there. They had previously been squatters. But it doesn't mean they didn't have ancestral homes. This is the thing you must understand. The people who probably came to work and settle there. But if you ask them, they have an ancestral home with land that they can go back to. So the issue of squatters, again, when you're looking at it, these are things that have to be taken into consideration because the historical aspects have to do. Let's talk about Central, for instance, and look at people who later came to own land that had previously been owned by the white settlers.
Yep.
Think about it. Were they necessarily the people who had been original inhabitants of that land? Maybe not. But they're people who had an association with the people who settled on that land. So now, these are issues that actually must be dealt with because they're a reality.
But I think there's been a great reluctance to address land issues. And that's why they've not been addressed. So it's the longer it goes on, the more difficult it appears. But there have been many opportunities to look at that. Even the Indogo Commission on Land was there. The TJRC offered ways. And even in this particular situation, I know the Mazrui family they have talked to the First Family. They've talked to the government. And they also know that by surrendering a certain portion of land, they remain with others.
Yeah.
You know,
The
and they
bulk of
already
it,
have
really.
given that piece that they have sold off to Mombasa Cement, for example. You know, and they benefited from that. Then there's the suggestion that the Ports Authority have bought some land for them in Kikambala as well. So they're not going to go penniless. and yet it can be a win-win
So
situation.
you're
And
saying there's
and
no political will to discuss this issue?
not to there's no political will to discuss most of the land issues, you know, because why would we sit down? I remember going back to the Ndongo Commission when I was in Kitale, and we brought hundreds of files of cases of settlement schemes, public land, prison land, etc. And there was a way forward offered, but nobody implemented it. There was no desire. There was just people hoped that the land.
Why?
situation-
Because the landowners have their are in power.
Oh, of course. You know, I mean, if you look at the beneficiaries, those who own the most land are those who are in power, you know.
Yep.
And even that's the situation in the coast. If you go to Taita Taveta, the first family have a large piece of land. The deputy president has his share that you saw was a controversial issue last week, that he bought land from the Criticus family.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you look at that, there's that fear. That's why you need to mediate. You need to negotiate. And it's not just land. It's that I think that those people who are in power may be willing to
Cede some.
And to negotiate themselves out of power. Because a lot of the struggle that we're talking about, the succession issue, it's the first family and the other wealthy families in this country who are wondering, how can we continue to enjoy what we have in another political scenario? You know, so you do need to start talking, and you do start to negotiate and mediation. And I think we also use mediation. I know that we have an example in Mombasa that we're working on, which is a 1,000-acre farm, which was given to the Catholic Church, and then over 100 years ago, and it was occupied by people. And we've been going on for a year working with the community to make sure that it's a win-win situation, and that the church remains with like 100, 150 acres for its own facilities, and that the people who are there, that they will gradually be guaranteed the security of tenure. So it is possible. It just mediation takes time, and it takes effort. And many of these issues that are historical, because you can't exactly trace the origin of some of these. Who was there first, you know? But you know, this is the current reality, and it doesn't have to be a winner takes all.
Has mediation actually been used before? You know, in this clamor for land reform, the conversation about land, you know, from those moments before the constitution was enacted until now, we have a National Land Commission. We still have issues with land. Has the approach for mediation ever been used? Because when you talk about land, it always comes out like it's you've got our land and you've got to move. You've got to give us our land
Well,
back.
mediation in general, I mean, even the Constitution recognises the right for alternative justice systems,
Yep.
you know, and it does. And that tendency, even on small issues, small land issues, of people running to court, it's only the advocates who benefit from that. So the opportunity is there. But what people don't realise is that it does take time and it does take effort, you know, and it's not something you're going to solve in one meeting. I know, like in the Giriyama land that we're working with, and another one down the Parbat land down in Kwale and in Tanga. Like, we must have had 20 or 30 different meetings on each one of those over a period of times of knowing and setting the agenda and the needs of the people and listening to each other. And eventually you get there once trust is built.
Over a long time, over a long period of time. 17 minutes after 9 o'clock, this is a Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. On the hot seat in this hour is Father Gabriel Dolan. He is a serious advocate for land rights, among many other things. Of course, he's a Catholic priest. He's been in the country for long. He's worked in Turkana, in Kitale. Right now, he's based in Mombasa for the last, 15 years, Gabriel?
12.
12 years. The last 12 years he's been in Mombasa. So we're discussing the issue of land at the coast, and also what ails the coast and what's the solution for the coast. You know, when you talk about land and then you talk about historical injustices, those two go hand in hand. And the journey towards addressing these issues started a long time ago, soon after independence. But let's just look at the last couple of, let's say, just 2 decades. You've had even the Ndongo Land Report, the TJRC, the new constitution in the National Land Commission, all attempts at bringing some sanity to the issue of land. Are they bearing any fruit?
Minimum, I would say. It's an opportunity, but I'd say it's minimum impact. if we look at the National Land Commission, it's their primary role is to protect public land. Like they came out of office in disgrace. And it was a coastal man, Swazura, was the chairman. They were disgraced. And most of them have cases in court.
Right.
So it's often like the law can be right and the Constitution protects them. It's you don't get the right people in there to do it. And that's a real failing. I think it's a failing of all constitutional commissions. And now even those who are capable won't even bother to try.
Because they're the minority.
Yes.
And they see that the efforts that have been made in the past didn't really yield or bear any kind of fruit. So they're reluctant then to get involved in the process, wouldn't you say?
I think that's part of it. They may never get as far as the table. That's the other part. If you're a really committed reformer, and it does make an impact. If we go back like to the time we had the Kenya National Commission for Human Rights, when Maina Kiai was in the chair, they had an impact, even with limited resources. And when it was then made a Constitutional Commission, and they impacted it. Now, where's the National Commission now? You see, there's a danger that those who get approved and selected are those who are acceptable to the system. So it's kind of, you can be locked out. And I'd say the exception was maybe when Willie Mutunga became Chief Justice. How he sneaked in there and surprised everybody was a surprise for everybody, but mostly. But I still think that there are many Kenyans who didn't do these positions, and they should go. And they should demand and say, why wasn't I given an opportunity?
It sounds to me like you want civil society people to occupy these offices. Now, you've just given us two examples. Maina Kiai, civil society person, Willie Mutunga coming from the civil society. Of course, you, Father Gabriel Dolan, very well known as a civil society activist as well. It looks like, from where you sit, only the people from your side would be able to impact any change. And anybody else is compromised.
No, of course. And there are people in civil society who are compromised as well. And there are people who from civil society who went to government and have been in disgrace. We also know that. I'm just thinking of two obvious people, and I know there are as many corrupt people in civil society as there are in government. It's a fact. I've seen them, yes, but not quite as many, I hope. But they're there, and there's been corruption in civil society, absolutely. And it doesn't. Civil society nowadays doesn't always attract people who are committed to serve the poor. It can be a career choice. Yeah. It can be well paid, and it's an advancement if you want to become a politician. So to get people who are committed and willing to sacrifice their lives and their time and work long hours on behalf of the poor and the weak, then that's challenging. But it's not only, there are people, I'm sure. I mean, those are the people that I may be familiar with, but in every sector, there are many people who can hold those
good
positions.
people.
Yes, many, and many competent people.
Right. To solve all of this, I mean, because people have been dogged by this for years and years. We have, it's easily moving to, next generations. How will this be solved? Because it's a big issue. It's there, right front and center. It's in our faces. How is this going to be solved, really?
It might need something fairly radical. How about thinking of letting land become a devolved function?
You wrote about this in yesterday's column.
Just to provoke it. I mean, I'm thinking about that. What would happen? That doesn't mean that you're going to make local laws, because you still have the land laws. You still have the National Land Commission. You'll have policies. But it puts the onus back on the county government to say, stop your whinging. It's in the interest of many politicians not to address these issues, because they pull them out every 5 years and said, I'm going to settle all these people. They depend on the poor for votes. Yeah. So it's the same old lies and the same old promises. So if you put the onus back on the county government and say, and increase something, obviously it's budgeting. Land needs advancement.
With the kind of corruption that we're seeing in the county government, you're now saying that we devolve land. Our primary
still
resource,
so contentious even before that. Yeah.
To those governors and MCAs.
No, you know what? There'll be better oversight, because it's right there and locally, and people know these are our issues.
Your point is a valid one, but even as we speak, there is land that the county manages. When the municipalities, there was land that was under their purview. Is it not so?
Absolutely.
So let's start with how they manage that, and then talk about giving them
the public land that they at their disposal.
Yes, they did have. They've always had. Even the county government now, they've always had that capacity. If you look at our land tenure, there is land At any given point, there's land that is specifically managed at the national level. But there's land, this devolution we're speaking of, it's not as though it started now. There was land within the municipalities and even within counties that the issues there are managed right there.
At the county level.
Yes. Even titles are issued at that level. It used to be at the district level. Now, how have these issues been managed? Unfortunately, poorly.
Perhaps maybe for the Dolan, what you could tell us is what exactly do you mean by when you think of devolving land?
I think that when you imagine that it's done at the county level, is that immediately people will have a better sense of expectation and a better oversight of how it might be done. Then, it might give people more hope, and they will be more involved in the whole process of saying, look, this has been there for so long. Now we have our own structures. Now, and we have our own budget for it.
Yep.
And as we've just heard, like the county governments don't even budget even for the administration of their own land. So to even address those issues, like if we take the example of Mombasa and the housing, the housing was was municipal land and housing,
Yes.
and then this whole new proposal by Governor Joho to build 30,000 units, that was also on land. But in fact, when you challenge him over and say, what's this housing policy? Rather than protect the housing, most of that land he was given away, because the plan was proposed to build 30,000 units as a public-private partnership,
Right.
and that 80% would go to the developer, 6,000 would remain in the county, which is just almost what they have at the moment. And in the process, then he would
So
have
private sector ends up
the winners.
taking up the land.
Yes. Now, and it was a 200 billion project. Now, if you had a governor who cared about his people, he would spend more time trying to regularize the land on which
You've just
the
given
poor
us
live.
one example where devolving land would actually work against the people, if you look at it that way. And I
It-
can
it
take you
could,
even further.
yes.
Right here in Murang'a. So in Murang'a, the governor of Murang'a is in talks, trying to talk about Kakuzi land, right? There is the Del Monte land, which Murang'a and Kiambu County are saying, you know what, your tenure is coming to an end. We are going to push for that tenure not to be renewed. Let's take over this land. When you look at it this way, aren't you saying that one, public land in the case of Mombasa, two, private land that has been put into proper use by private developers is also at risk just because of localized politics?
Of course, it's always at risk, because of the political situation that we have. But I don't think that you're going to end up losing more land as a result.
Yeah.
I think you'll have more public participation and you'll have more insight into it. And the people will feel a better sense. And even if you are to take over some of the estates, and it's in the better interests of the current population, at least there will be a process in which people are involved. And the decision is more acceptable. It's not like that we have to always protect the investors who've been there for so long and who've been benefiting. We have to match that with saying, well, what's the real interests and the benefits of the local people at this time and in the immediate future. So it is complex, and the risk you're saying, Eric, is like the fact that we're always at the risk of corrupt politicians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But hopefully we won't always have Joho in office.
But let me ask the question before we get back to Joe. We'll get back there. What you're referring to is what is called the Urban Renewal Project.
Yes.
But it's also in Nairobi. You are aware, of course, that these projects would not have been in place if it wasn't for the involvement of also the national government.
Yes.
Now, so if we say that the county government is getting a raw deal and the national government has signed off on this, question number one, are we saying the national government doesn't understand this? Because even though the county government may have a say on the land, but it's on behalf of the national government. It's delegated, really. Okay? Now, secondly, are you saying that there is no benefit at all that this particular program will actually bring to the people who live in these estates, to the people who are in the county? Because the county gains something from these buildings as they're currently constituted. And if we talk about the numbers that you are referring to, that it means there will be more people who will have access to housing. There will be more revenue for the county government as we speak. And should we say the benefits attendant are therein clearly stipulated? So these losses you speak of, what are they?
I think the losses are, if you look at that urban renewal program for Mombasa,
Yes.
the losses is that you are selling off housing units to people who can already afford them anyhow.
And what about the people who live there? They're not being considered.
There is that consideration, but there is nothing.
But you're not
And
adding in
that's
other
why the
people.
process. You know, those people who are there and currently on resident, because there are over 3,000 people.
Yeah.
Right. They have been promised there's nothing in writing. Even now, as it's gone to the next stage of, instead of like building new units, that they're renovating the existing ones, they've been promised, and okay, we'll relocate you for a while. They were promised 750,000, then they were offered 45,000. So people feel
Why are they being
so
offered
there's no-
750,000 for what purpose?
for the paying
relocation.
rent, relocation, and displacement.
Just like the Pangani ones in Nairobi.
Yes.
Yeah, where they give you a certain
Yes.
amount. on your way,
Remember, Pangani only had 48 tenants. So you could offer, they were given 600,000.
So you could afford.
Yes, if you're talking about a place that has 700 tenants, for instance, like say a place like Changamwe, that amount almost becomes impossible because it directly impact on the cost of the
course.
actual development.
Same thing
yes.
is going to happen even in this Nairobi renewal. Once it moves out of Pangani,
Even
the
that
small
600 that
area.
you're talking about is
of-
not going to be.
But let me even bring the situation, interestingly enough. You've had, I think, more than, was it 2 cases that have gone to court
Yes.
and which the tenants have lost?
No.
Did
Didn't win, but
okay,
didn't
did they
lose.
win the case?
No,
so-
didn't stop the project. But what we went on was the right that there wasn't enough public participation. The court ruled that there was. The second case that we went when we appealed it, it was also granted to us that all the information should be provided to the organisations like ourselves, Hakietu and Kituo Chishuria, and the public. And it's only now that the county government knows it has a responsibility to share that information, because they were making these decisions without any consultation. The public participation was minimal, and the court ruled in their favour.
What is the threshold for public participation in such matters?
I think, like advanced, the court, it's not in law, but the court ruled the threshold had been met, because they announced and said, we're coming to your
You're
place.
suggesting that the court ruling was not right.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Take a short break, take a look at what's happening on the roads, and then we continue the conversation. Father Gabriel Dolan is in the studio on the hot seat this hour. He leads an organization that's based in the coast called Hakietu. He is also a man who has been advocating for human rights for long. Now, the coast region, Father Gabriel, for a long time has been feeling like it's been sidelined. Like, it's the backwaters of the national government, because of the coastal strip or whatever, because of whatever historical issues that they've been there. But the people of the coast have for a long time felt that they are neglected. So just coming to ask you the direct question, what ails the coast?
At the moment. I'd say the first thing that's most noticeable when you live in Mombasa, and I've been there for the last 12 years, is that there's a shortage of cash there at the moment. There is.
Simple. Within the county system.
Yes.
Okay.
Wow.
Yes. And there's a shortage of cash everywhere. First of all, like you can notice that even the traffic on the roads is less. When you use, traffic jams are less. There's less money. Tourism is in a shambles, which is a main income for so long. And part of it is the insecurity issue, that has been there. And the
Hasn't that improved? That would have been the case like 5-6 years ago.
It has never picked up.
The numbers that come out of the Kenya Ministry of Tourism actually indicate that the number of tourists has increased, whether domestic or international.
No. The figures I saw from the number of tourists in Kenya improved last year, but not in the coast. Like, it said that there was 1.3 million tourists last year, and something like 100,000 came through Mombasa. Now, what percentage is that? It's like 10%.
10%, yes.
Now, they may have gone elsewhere as well, but it's noticeable. The hotels are empty, so they could shut down. And if it wasn't for domestic tourism, they would really be in trouble. It's Kenyans who are keeping the businesses alive. So they can forget. I think ever since people started moving, Zanzibar now is the favoured destination.
Yeah.
That's where they're gone. I was in Zanzibar just a couple of weeks ago. I couldn't believe it. You could have been in Europe. There were so many Wazungu. I mean, you haven't seen people like that in Mombasa for a long time.
Yeah.
Not for 10 years. So tourism. Also, it's overpriced. Kenyan product in the coast, it's overpriced. It's expensive by comparison. It is. So
Too
people,
much reliance on this.
and it's an old product. It's an old product. Trends are also changing.
Yep.
Like it's no longer fashionable for Wazungu to get a colour and tan and to come to the coast. People are concerned about health and skin cancer and environmental issues. And if they do want that type of a holiday, they seem to be going to North Africa now. It's nearer and it's cheaper. So that's part of it. And then, of course, that's tourism. But then you have the SGR damage, It's had a huge impact. And it's gradually getting down to everybody. It affects everybody.
Right. We see that, there's a complaint about certain services not having come through. Now, whether we're talking about, county services on a day-to-day basis with the issues of tourism and garbage collection, etc. If we want to look at now promises that were made, of course, with the current administration and saying that certain things are going to be in place for the issues that previously dogged the county. And now we're being told it's going to roll out. In 2 years, it will be sorted out. This is what this is what has been reported in terms of what is going to happen now. Do you see that coming out? Do you see that being?
No.
Because we have a lot of outcry from the residents of Mombasa County talking about that the other thing does not work.
The housing, the garbage
collection,
sanitation.
Flooding, water, sanitation and
everything.
sewage,
No.
everything.
I mean, the governor's been there for, 7 years?
Yep.
And he's mostly, he's absent, when we talk about the absentee landlords, but we have an absentee governor.
What does that mean? He's not in Mombasa? Or
He's not.
in
He's
office?
occasionally.
Okay.
And he flies into Mombasa from Vipingo, to meet ambassadors and stuff like that. So it's like, apart from what everybody sees is the Kibarani dump site being reclaimed. And that was mostly funded by Mombasa Cement.
Yeah.
They should tell us why. Anyway, but that's something different. But it has happened, and that's the main thing. And there are always plans about salination of the water and this and this. They're all huge plans, but they're just on paper. So it just lacks leadership. And now we don't. There's only four ministers in place, and there's no service board. So what's happening? It's so not just look at Mombasa, but on the other hand, is like you're asking about the coast in general. I mean, things are happening in other places.
In Kwale?
Kwale, I'd say there's signs of development everywhere, and there's a general level of satisfaction. There is. Even in Kilifi, where the governor is blamed for a lot of things, and remember, TV occasionally highlights the schools and the dump sites. And so, but there are things that are visible. Definitely things that are visible in terms of improvement in schools.
Is it because that prior to devolution, hardly anything had happened there?
Exactly.
So even the slightest movement was considered a huge achievement.
Exactly.
Yes.
And also because urban centres were probably getting more than their fair share under the latter funds in the past. So I've always felt, yes, the areas that are farthest away from the urban centres, people have the highest level of satisfaction with devolution. Like in Turkana, when I go up there, and I know when I was in Turkana, like in the 80s, there was like 2 doctors in the whole county, and there's 15 to 20 in Lodwar County Hospital.
The referral hospital.
Yes.
So
it's noticeable, and it's noticeable in many, many places. But in Mombasa, that people have expectations and promises.
Well, development had been centered in Mombasa anyway.
Yes.
Everything at the coast
there's high
more or less
expectation
happened in Mombasa.
Yes.
High expectation in Mombasa, and also now then you're judging
and high population.
and high population, and also then you're judging them more harshly. Wouldn't you also say that there's some movement, there's some work that the county government of Mombasa has done?
I mean, even the worst of governments do some small items.
There's something small.
There's always something. I mean, you see the cover roads here, there, the link roads. There's the dump site I've mentioned in Kibarani, which to me was a relief because I had built the school. As a church, we'd built the school in Kibarani, the other side of the road. And every day that smell was coming in there. And it was so unhealthy for the children.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are some things, but it's a mediocre performance, and mediocre is not good enough. Basically that's what it is.
It really isn't. What kind of clamor have we seen? I mean, obviously residents have been speaking, and we've seen expression of that. But I mean, we seem to be at an impasse then what is coming from government in terms of what actually is being done and what will be done. We talked about an almost absentee governor.
No,
then,
not almost.
Absentee, okay, it's clear.
It's not almost absentee.
Clear absentee governor. I mean, of course, the question, what then is going to be done? Short of people going into the streets and protesting.
But even that has been done poorly. I mean, because I think if there was a better effort to mobilize people and that civil society organizations didn't compete with each other and over this and take over the process, if this was allowed, as it was at the beginning, to be run by those who were affected most, it could have impacted. Because if you want the movement to start and complaints, you have to build it. You have to reach out to those who are affected, and you have to do groundwork. You just can't be bringing Boniface Mongi on the streets and hope when you get tear gas and it's a front page news. I mean that's infantile, and it's about numbers. And I know every day I meet people who are suffering that the families. A man is married in his late 40s and he's lost his job. He was just a broker at the port.
Yep.
And he has to go back to Ukambani and look for a shamba or hope that he has built something. But they have to move. They can't afford. You can't live in Mombasa
anymore
if you don't have a job.
Yep.
Yes.
You can go back to the rural area.
Yes.
You can go back to the rural area, and if you have something small, you'll somehow use whatever you have and survive.
Yeah.
And there are many people. And I suppose the sadness is that, is that the governor has gone silent in this. And Ryla has. Ryla met all the groups and promised nothing. The SGRE, to force people to carry the goods on the SGR. I mean, it is ridiculous because business is competitive.
So will a change in
the
leadership
handshake is
solve all of
impacting
this?
them.
Pardon?
Will a change of leadership
in the county?
In the county change this?
No. You need to change the leadership at every level, and a change of attitude, and where people feel they have a voice that's heard. But I know that if those common people who really suffered in their own way were allowed to participate in this protest, it might have impacted. Now people are dismissing and say these are just the civil society. They're getting money from abroad.
Of course, yeah.
Yes, they're hiring people, to protest, and it'll fizzle out.
And you have a problem with that as well, because you're saying the civil society is sort of divided in their approach and using the wrong people to raise the voices.
I think they're very sincere, but it's not about them. The people who are suffering should be the ones who are allowed to
should be the ones who are seeing.
The civil society seems to have hijacked the process, and it's about them.
Yes.
And I think, if I get you right, Father, you're saying the problem, it's not them. The people who they purport to represent are not being represented as they should. Yes.
Or they are not even participating, being allowed
They
to
were,
participate.
but they need to be engaged in and saying, how do you do this? And it's the very same thing about, if we look at the disappearances, those 4 young men from Kwale who were found in Savo. I don't think it's a news item today. No. And we should ask ourselves why.
Well, we have issues like locusts and flooding, which affect the whole country, and they aren't issues. So in comparison, 4 lives are important, but against that background,
no.
You get where you're coming from.
Very low.
We're talking about, of course, the clamor for people who've been impacted negatively by the order for SGR, and the kind of conversation that they've been having and the reaction that they get from the leadership. You've said that the governor seems not to have listened to them or even acknowledged that they have a valid point. You're also saying that the former Prime Minister, the leader of ODM, and Mombasa is predominantly ODM, they're also feeling like the leader of ODM is not listening to them. Remember, there's a handshake. So you've got to balance these two, and seeing the bigger picture here, which is the handshake and the need for seeming to support what the government is doing. But also, I'll remind you that the governor of Mombasa came to Nairobi and they held a meeting with CS Matiang'i, CS Macharia, and that order was rescinded at some point, wasn't it?
Not exactly, because it's easy to say it has not been
A
formalized.
statement was made about it being rescinded. Was it actioned?
No, and when people are, and even if they say, "Oh, we've done it," you see, they have another way of frustrating you at the port that you delay, you're not priority, so you lose money and everything
Okay.
else. There's many ways to make the point and to force the issue, but I suppose the handshake, of course, is there, but that's not a justification. We're supposed to have an opposition leader.
But even
We had one time, but we don't.
But let me ask the question. How on earth would the handshake interfere with something that's supposed to benefit the citizenry? I mean, it's supposed to enhance it, unless I've gotten something wrong here.
Well, the people are making noise, but the leaders who would be taking their noise and amplifying it are not.
So it has nothing to do with the handshake, does it?
There's a reason why.
No, I'm saying if
can
you're talking
understand-
about a situation that seems unchanged despite the handshake, so it means the handshake has not made an impact on this at all.
this at all.
But I'm also saying the handshake has nothing to do with exacerbating the situation.
The handshake has everything to do with exacerbating the situation. CT.
Explain.
This is the issue. So if, for example, the kind of dichotomy that we had before was there in place, we'll be having a lot of pressure coming from the leader
The
of
opposition.
ODM, the leader of the county, which is ODM. They'll be talking about it. Right now, they're causing. This is it. The national government is not getting the necessary pressure that it should be getting from the opposition, which is dominant in that region.
The discussion that you talked about, where the governor apparently came to Nairobi and talked to the big wigs,
Yes.
in theory, that is also supposed to achieve the same thing as marching in the streets and making noise, isn't it?
Yes.
And it didn't. They've been marching on the streets, haven't they?
They
A
have.
bit disjointed, not loud enough,
But marching all the same.
marching all the same. But the status quo has been maintained.
Yes.
So what you're saying is that the people who we consider to be the leaders of the opposition are doing the very opposite of what they claim to be doing, looking after the interests of the people.
Exactly. And that's what we're saying. And there obviously is some benefit in it for that, because the companies belonging to Joho's family, according to newspaper reports, which he has never denied and has not taken to court, very detailed in Nation newspaper, was that his companies get a 10-year concession, where they only pay 20% of transporting their goods. So that's the sweetener. And also, he's
So there's no
reported to
right.
have his own space up in Naivasha when it's all ready.
So according to this, there's no reason then, or there's no incentive, as it were, to make any kind of change, because you benefit from the opposite being the
exactly,
case.
you have moved ahead. It's like, oh, we accept the inevitability, let's benefit from it. But it's about them. It's not about the people.
So did it start with the handshake, or was
Has it always been there?
the governor inclined in that direction? Where
Well, the governor was bullied into
Into
this
this
situation.
position.
Yeah, because remember, his companies were stopped and KRA
let
moved
me
in
ask
and-
the question: if someone is offering you something that is going to benefit you monetarily, are you really being bullied, or are you being enticed?
No, that was the stick and the carrot. The stick was the
the
threat.
first thing
I said,
is-
if you don't,
The first thing is your company does not operate.
yes.
But it wasn't just them.
And in a way,
All people who own CFSs suffered, so
Yes.
it can't
Yes.
just be them.
Yes, but
transported suffered. I mean, that value chain of people who worked at
They
the
all
port,
suffered.
everybody suffered.
Yes, but the larger companies was Joho's and Grain Bulk, who've been financial supporters of ODM for a long
Mombasa
time.
politician Suleiman Shabal was seated where you are now, and he told us before this SGR even came to fruition, he had sat down and he had had a meeting with most of those business people, and he told them, guys, start preparing for the eventuality. Obviously, you're not going to be getting 100% of the business coming from the port. This is going to compete with you.
There
Start
will be a
preparing
reduction,
for that.
of course, yes.
And then they were like, no, well, let's see what happens. So they didn't take those steps. Do they also take a share of the blame as well for not being adequately prepared, not adequately preparing?
Some of them prepared in terms of the inevitability. They didn't buy new vehicles, and they knew it was going to happen, or they moved their business already to somewhere else. And that's part of the concern. But the other part of the concern is, what's it doing to Mombasa as a town?
Yep.
What impact?
it's-
And when it
it's
reaches
killing
like
the town.
it's killing it. Yeah, and that's my concern.
But it's going to happen anyway. Even if you say it's
No. Why
30%.
why
It
must
doesn't
happen?
have. It
Why
doesn't.
must
It's
it
not
happen?
inevitable.
No.
Why must it
30
happen?
Even if it's 30% of the business that's going to be lost to the SGR, huge chunk of business is going to be lost to the SGR. Leave it to market forces, whatever. This is still going to happen.
No,
Same
Eric,
thing
no.
we're talking about tourism.
Eric, no.
It's happened. We have a very expensive, old and
the
archaic
number
tourism
of
product.
containers that go through that port are around 45 million every year, 40 to 45. SGR capacity for the whole year
50%.
is
For the whole year is
22 million.
50%.
Yes, so
they're not
essentially
able to handle it.
and they're not only not able, they are stopping other people who could handle it and make
doing
the
so.
course easier from doing so. So this is, in my opinion, a clear case of the government sabotaging the business that is in Mombasa. Because what else do you call this?
The
It's sabotage.
inevitability, inevitability I'm talking about is 50% of that business is likely still to go. And I've actually said 30%.
Go where?
To go
So
where
say
though?
30% of that business will go to the SGR.
They are
If
they are
you-
hogging everything.
Yes, for now. Which is wrong. We agree. It's wrong.
Eric, look,
But
we're talking about now. This when is the history of our country of things always supposed to happen, which never happened.
never
preparing for the inevitability.
Why not
The
do
coast
this? Is
region-
the question,
the
and
coast
this
region-
is the problem that dogs us over and over again. We say tomorrow, and it never comes. We have a
Today, the
problem-
coast
we have a
region is
problem
not working
right,
with
we have
its
a
tourism.
problem right now. Exactly. That's
They are
another
not
issue.
improving their
We have
tourism
a problem
product.
right
You
now.
cannot blame the
Why
government.
not
The government
deal
has
with
Oh
done
yes,
nothing.
you can,
Why not
because
deal with
the
the right
security
now?
that causes those problems is the docket of the government. It's them to.
When is the last time we had an insecurity that could impact the
Oh no,
tourism?
no, it's not the
Over
Kayabongo
10 years
situation.
ago.
No. All you need is constant reports of marauding young people being killed. It spells out as insecurity.
Or the issue in Lamu.
It spells as insecurity.
Yes.
And who do you think is supposed to handle the
One is the
terrorists and
government.
the so-called terrorists? The
Okay.
government.
Who's supposed to make the product a bit better? To improve the product?
Why would you make
Father
the
Gabriel
product
Dolan has
better
told us.
if you know very well people are
The
not going
product
to
at
come
the
there?
coast,
come there.
the product at the coast is old. The product at the coast is expensive. We haven't changed anything on that product. Look at what the others are doing. They are offering
it has all
ecotourism.
been true, but it's because tourism is not just limited to the coast. People come to the coast for a week, go to Masai Mara for a week, go to wherever for a week. It was a combined experience.
It still is.
That is what, yes, it is, but other people are offering the same thing, and they don't have the insecurity we have.
Other countries are offering even newer and better and cheaper.
They don't have the insecurity we have.
They don't, yes, but
I'm
they're
going to
offering
keep-
better.
You'll say it, but I'll keep telling you.
Insecurity is
They
not
don't
just
have-
there. It's across the country.
Eric, we are suffering more than we ought to, and the government has a role that it isn't playing. What the coast people are feeling is that they've been disenfranchised.
from all of this.
They don't
Absolutely.
matter.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is something that must be listened to and must be heard.
And
because
something
they
must
are
then be
disenfranchised.
done about it. And then something must be done about it. Because you cannot continually having a section of the country that speaks about being disenfranchised over and over and over again. And there are glaring things that you can do about it in the now, not about tomorrow, where we are right now.
And what they're
But
saying is
what-
not theory.
What should
no.
we do now?
I think there is a sense in which that the leaders could do more, you know, and that everybody needs. And it's not just complaining, and you know, it's demanding. Because when you mention that thing of Pwani, Sio, Kenya,
Yep.
there is a defeatist thing in it. You know, it's a last resort. But how about saying Pwani ni Kenya?
And
you
we
have a
insist
right,
that we must be
insist
treated
that we
like,
get this.
treated
You
like
know.
every other Kenyan.
Yes, so that combines all our ideas together, which is like you've got to show leadership. You know, you've got to show, and you've got to show a united front.
So what you're saying essentially is that the coast lacks strong leadership by
It
and
does,
large.
yes, and a united leadership. It has occasionally individuals here, hardworking people there, but to come together and this notion of the
I don't see the disunity that you're talking about.
No, he
In
didn't say
leadership,
disunity. He said absence. You know, there's a
lack
problem
of
here.
united leadership.
Yes, it's one point, but one, weak leadership, spots of leadership, leaders who come up, but thinking of them as a collective,
collective
group of
body.
people, not there.
Not there.
No.
We're coming to the end of the show for the Gabriel Dolan. Thank you very much for joining us. Take this last 1.5 minutes to just, paint a picture. What is it that should be done to improve the livelihoods of the people of the coast region?
I think it starts with attitude, is to believe that these are Kenyans. This is not an isolated region. It's not a forgotten place. And they have a right to be heard. It starts with you. Do you really believe in them?
Right.
You know, it may have a different climate and be a little bit remote, but it's Kenya, and you've got to begin by saying these are Kenyans. And so the government has to take it seriously and has to respect. They know, they should also know from the past. If you isolate, it's to your own disadvantage in the end, and it's up to local leaders as well, But I do think, for all of that, like devolution is still the best for all its flaws. It's the best thing that has happened. It'll eventually get there. It'll improve. The quality of leadership will improve.
Yeah.
And it must be an issue that's devolved and that more responsibility is taken locally. And that includes a land docket.
Oh,
Let's explore it.
A quick
Yes.
one for the Dolan.
Yeah.
Yes or no to regional governments?
No. Not as we know it. Because this is just creating for jobs for idlers.
Right.
Not as
For
we know.
idlers.
Right. That should have been a question that you were brought up.
Father Gabriel Dolan, thank you very much
Thank
for
you very
joining
much.
us. I will, of course, keep inviting you, talking about the issues of land, issues of human rights, issues of coast region. Asante sana. City Muga, say your final words for the day.
No, this issue
longer,
of
like
the
3.
coast and disenfranchisement, this conversation must continue.
This must.
It must continue.
Do.
We keep talking, folks. Even
This
tomorrow.
is it.
Right.
When we
Thank
stop
you.
talking, of course, you'll hear people fighting. So we must continue talking. We must continue interrogating what we're doing. Thank you very much for tuning in. Join us again tomorrow, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Kenya's biggest conversation from Father Gabriel Dolan from Nduoko, CT Muga, and myself, Eric Latif. Have a good day. From now until 3 o'clock, uninterrupted music. We call it Spice Soul. Uninterrupted music, and then 3 to 7 you have Monique who will join you and take you home on Spice Drive, and then the adults in the room will be here from 7 o'clock until 10 o'clock. The adults in the room are Eric, Emmanuel, and Barbara, aka the Duchess of Ikolomani. Have a good morning, folks. Good morning.